Our reliance on fossil fuels is a massive problem that infiltrates the different sectors of sustainability. Since the introduction of coal in the mid 1850s to the 1900s, the United States has relied very heavily on petroleum products. Our problem with fossil fuels is layered within the three E's of sustainability. It negatively affects our environment by relying on the harvesting of carbon-based fuels that take thousands of years to make rather than on something more sustainable. The petroleum market essentially runs our economy and infrastructure. Thousands of Americans rely on the fossil fuel industry for work, and our current government believes in less regulation, specifically in the coal sector. This is wrong, and we have fell systematically into this trap for years. This brings me to the equity of our nation. Fossil fuels are put above every other energy source due to the involvement with oil companies and our government/representatives. The oil companies basically pad the pockets of lawmakers to favor their sector even if it's totally wrong. This trap has been happening since the mid-1850s when the introduction of fossil fuels began. Before the coal reliance, we primarily used wood to burn, but since 1900, fossil fuels have made up at least 80% of the U.S. fuel mix. So here's my meta map. So my meta map starts with my wicked problem, fossil fuels, and initially branches into why we are so dependent and then transitions into why we rely so heavily on fossil fuels. I broke down why we are so dependent through our infrastructure and that it's been in place for years, through the profits in fossil fuels and then how they relate to our government. Next, I looked at how we relied so heavily on fossil fuels with the oil companies running deep in the pockets of politicians. And again, I found that the profit of large corporations and lobbyists runs deep. The next step was to find information on alternative energy resources and why we aren't utilizing those methods yet. There are various alternative energy sources such as hydro energy, wind energy, ocean tides, and hemp, to name a few. But again, the profits in the infrastructure set in place from the first section are hindering the exploration of renewable energy. Next, I looked into viable solutions that maybe would work. To break the systematic trap we have been stuck in, we must offer incentives to move forward out of the fossil fuel era. First, government involvement is necessary. We will not make it anywhere until our leadership is on the same page as we are. Offering incentives towards renewable energy will be our first start. Instead of offering subsidies for fossil fuel exploration, we would offer subsidies into renewable energy sources to encourage the private sector to compete with each other with how they do now in the fossil fuel market. Also, using the media in a huge positive light for renewable energy would be a huge help rather than how they do now with just bashing renewable energy and staying with coal. The reliance on fossil fuels is enabled by our government, specifically in the fossil fuel bailout G20, which provides subsidies for oil, gas, and coal exploration. Our federal government spends $88 billion a year in fossil fuel exploration, while our private investment sector spends $37 billion a year on top of that by the 20 global oil and gas producers. This is one of our biggest traps. The amount of money the federal government keeps investing in fossil fuel exploration versus alternative energy sources. Until the government quits this enabling through subsidies and other methods, we will be stuck in the system we have been using for the last 115 years. The tipping point will come when the government finally steps away from fossil fuels and invests time and effort into alternative energy sources. I believe government involvement is the most beneficial way to get this wicked problem into the crosshairs. Through mass media, we can teach the majority of our country about good alternatives and not sticking to fossil fuels, which we have used for the last 115 years.